If you're like me, you were growing up around the time that the internet was already fairly organized and sanitized for general use, so you never really understood the technicals of it or what actually holds everything up, but you just see it as something that works without really needing any other explanation, the same way you don't question how you breathe or how you can move your arms. But as you may know, the internet is very big. Whenever you have even a small community without proper organization, it instantly turns into chaos and nothing proper can get done. So that probably is making you wonder the same about the internet right now. How does it actually function deep down? No one person owns the internet, so what exactly is keeping it easily browsable for the average person? In case you weren't already aware, websites are simply just hosts of various files, and you can even think of them as like a computer folder. So if you go to YouTube, you're basically requesting it to send you tons of specific files, which then make up your home page. Over time, this has gotten very complex to allow for more than just basic text, such as the ability to play videos and have a clean looking homepage and all that stuff. And some websites allow you to access specific files within them by simply typing the file name after the URL. So for example, if a website creates a public file within itself and calls it logo.png, then looking up website.com/logo.png would basically send you that specific file if it exists. So in theory, a website could store a file with certain information about itself in order to help with organization. This is where we get to the robots.txt file. As I said before, looking up a file name after a website URL will give you a file if it exists. I used the example of a logo.png, but you can basically use any file type like text, for example, which is just a file with text in it, like Google Docs or any other notes app. But you'd expect each website to have completely different files, right? I mean, all your folders likely have different files and names, so websites should be similar. However, if we go to any website and type /robots.txt afterwards, you will receive a real file basically all of the time. So for example, if I go to youtube.com/robots.txt, I'm given access to this interesting file. So for now, we're not sure what any of this means, but what we know for certain is that this is a public file within YouTube named robots.txt, fair enough. But then what happens if we try this with other websites? Google.com/robots.txt also sends me a similar looking file, and a longer one at that, which seems to allow or disallow certain things. So then both Google and YouTube seem to have a file with the same exact name and structure. But perhaps it's because Google already owns YouTube, so it makes sense for both sites to have this similar file. However, go to any single website you can think of and you'll quickly realize that it has a robots.txt file. I looked at Wikipedia and it had this file, checked out an older site like CoolMath Games and it has one too, and even a more recent one like ChatGPT has one, and it looks like it was made by ChatGPT judging by the way the comments are written. I even went to a random Japanese merch store and you'll never believe what I found there. So clearly every single website seems to have this file with the same exact name and, more importantly, the same structure. We see user agents, allows and disallows, and a link to something called a sitemap. So I'll finally tell you that these files are a standard amongst websites and are used in agreement with each other to maintain a smooth and functional web for people to browse. In fact, website builders like Wix implement these by default, so pretty much every single website you'll ever find will contain a robots.txt file. But how come? It doesn't seem like an obvious file, so what led to its creation, and are there more files of this kind? So during the early age of the web in the 1990s, everything was more quote-unquote obvious and free, because it was small enough to not result in any important chaos. The way the internet worked, and kinda works to this day, is by using bots called crawlers to basically scan the internet for sites and then turn that into data, and these databases were effectively what web browsers use to find relevant sites for you. A crawler at a simple level is just a program that begins with one URL, downloads the page, extracts all the links it can find within that page, and repeats the same process for each link until there are no more links, which can create this large, unfiltered tree of links within links. In the early days, the internet wasn't as sophisticated as it was today, meaning that there weren't any rules for what these bots could or could not do, since again, a bot was just a user connection as far as the website was concerned. So search engines at the time just crawled everything that they could find, or more specifically, every possible link a website had. So then what happens if a bot crawls a link it shouldn't have access to? Or more importantly, tries to crawl infinite links such as calendars or search result pages? This would just overload and even crash the servers, since websites were smaller and could not handle bigger search engines sending them tons of connection requests. Sure, a website could be more secure or avoid having recurring links, but also what if your site needs to have a lot of links? The main issue was that webmasters had literally no control over this and didn't want random bots to index or admin pages and whatnot. So then in 1994, site owners and crawlers decided to agree on a standard, which was that sites would have a consistent file that gives bots info on what they can and cannot crawl crawl, and that crawlers would scan those to see what they're allowed to get. This became known as the robots exclusion protocol, and the idea was to have one file with the same name in plain text. This, again, was meant to be an agreement and not a lock, so malicious bots could just ignore the file. It instead served the purpose of making crawling the web more efficient for crawlers and also less infringing for site owners. This became super popularized as a standard around 1996, so even some 30-year-old websites will have the same robots.txt file as modern sites do. So if we return to some of the files, now we can actually decipher them properly. Links that begin with certain words are either allowed or not allowed. So Google, for example, this allows google.com/alerts links to be crawled, meaning that any Google link that has alerts after it will not be allowed no matter what comes after alerts. But you can override this with specific examples, and Google does this by allowing it if the alert link has a $sign after it, so it's a pretty basic rule set. You can also give different rules to specific bots, which should be self-explanatory, but you can also just put an asterisk, which all bots default to if they don't find their name on the list. This was perfect because now the majority of the internet had a shared stable rule to help crawlers not waste resources on links that would be useless for users, and help site owners choose which links they wanted to be on the public web. Again, this is just a request list and doesn't actually prevent any bots from accessing all of your links, which is why sites tend to secure their links with cookies and other methods. But with how important crawlers are for the general ability to browse the web, this was a very big change that helped stabilize the internet and make it a lot more user-friendly than it was before, to the point where the same files are used to this day in the same text file type on basically every single website. Except there's one more file. One more which I haven't told you about yet, and one you may have noticed in some of the robot files I showed you, or ones you looked up yourself out of curiosity. It is the sitemap.xml file. This file is a bit different from robots when you just try playing around with it. For one, you may notice it's an XML file and not a basic text file. Another thing you may notice is that certain sites seem to not have the file. For example, wikipedia.com/sitemap.xml provides us with no file and just an error screen saying that this URL does not exist, although it does have a robots file. YouTube at a glance also seems to not have the file if we just type in youtube.com/sitemap.xml. However, if we check the YouTube robots file, we will see that it actually does have two sitemaps linked, but they're both in the sitemaps and the product categories of YouTube and not the default homepage, which already immediately is a contrast from the robots file, which is made to be easily searchable across all websites by being accessible from the get-go instead of needing to venture deeper into the website. However, websites such as Google and ChatGPT, for example, work as expected, and typing sitemap.xml after their links gives you this interesting file, which immediately looks different from robots, mainly the fact that it looks a lot more like code and also has colors. It seems like every sitemap file just has a bunch of links which belong to the website but are just different pages of it. The YouTube one is a bit weirder though, because it seems to link to a bunch of other sitemaps which themselves have tons of links as well. And this makes sense since YouTube has different apps, right? Like YouTube Music and YouTube Kids and so on. So it seems like it has a sitemap for the sitemaps for all of these apps, and the sitemaps of those apps contain the pages for those apps. It sounds confusing when I say it like that. The point is that we do see patterns of organization in these sitemap files. But just as we looked at robots, how did this file come to be and what does it actually achieve? In the early 2000s, which is when robots was already a popular and standard file, the web exploded in popularity and became mainstream. And with that, obviously its importance shot up as well. So robots fixed the issue of lacking control over your own site, which meant that sites that previously had a dozen pages could now have literally millions of pages, and most sites took that opportunity because the internet was now important and actually was able to be used for profit and reach unlike before, so everyone wanted to create amazing large websites with more abilities. This is where you start getting things like website generators creating custom URLs, and also dynamic URLs, which means that like the page is created on the fly. So for example, if you add a new product to your website, it creates a URL with a newly generated name, since doing this manually would just quickly become annoying. And this all happened in quite a short span of time, and wasn't just one by one, but all websites began elevating their number and complexity of pages. This, as you may imagine, became an issue for crawlers trying to gather links. The first obvious issue is that if a site has millions of links, you will be unable to crawl everything due to both time and also it being super expensive. So crawlers fixed this by limiting the number of links they can gather. But now there's yet another problem. How does the crawler know which links are important and which are junk? Robot files didn't solve this because links often had tons of overlap and didn't actually tell crawlers what to prioritize. And sometimes links were not actually connected to the main page. So if YouTube has some important link that just doesn't exist in its homepage, then the crawler cannot find it, and therefore it does not show up in search engines. Crawlers now needed help finding new pages and pages that were hidden away, and sites obviously cared about their reach too. So a new solution was proposed, which was to make a sitemap file. It was made by Google and used the XML format, which just means it can have machine-readable links and metadata that says things like when this was last modified and so on. The format itself was very basic, which was just, again, a list of links which crawlers would prioritize to show on search engines, no matter how deep the link might be on the website itself. This is why certain sites don't actually have typical sitemaps such as Wikipedia, because it's just so broad that there's no specific links it needs to show you when you look up Wikipedia, besides just the home page. With how dynamic websites became, the rules of where the sitemap should be became lighter. There were still universal ways to link sitemaps. The biggest one would be to have it at the bottom of the robots file. However, crawlers still automatically check for common sitemap locations even if they're not listed in the robots file. There are less common ways too, like submitting sitemaps manually to the Google Search Console, or having it be a link inside your main page for crawlers to find. But in general, all sites put it inside of the robots file, and every crawler knows where to easily find it. So the two files that guide crawlers are robots.txt, which controls access, and sitemap.xml, which suggests what to crawl. Together they do a very important job of making the internet efficient and quick, and if all of their help disappeared tomorrow, then search engines would become more annoying to use and less efficient to run, websites would either run slower or have certain important links completely hidden away, and the internet experience would become less tailored to what sites actually want to show you, and more about sifting through random pages you don't care about. I do find it interesting how none of this is legally enforced and is purely based on agreement, and yet still has a very positive effect on how we browse the web to this day. And now whenever you're on whatever site, you can easily check out its robots.txt file and find what the site doesn't want crawlers to show on the web, and also just interesting quirks in general, like whether it has any unique comments or whether it has beef with a specific crawler and blocks only it from accessing the site. Sitemaps are more boring, but you can still browse them for fun and just see all the important links a website has and check them out. And so feel free to leave a comment sharing your thoughts on all of this and what you actually learned from the video, and if you liked it, which I assume you did since you're all the way at the end, just liking and copying the link to share the video without even sharing it are amazing signals for the algorithm to show this video to more people, and also lets me know to make more videos like this one in the future. Thank you for watching.